Hello, cosmic beings out there. I'm Mannah, a therapeutic astrologer and interviewer. I'm passionate about learning and sharing insights on how to live a better life. I hope you'll stick around as I infiltrate the minds of thought leaders, authors, and healers from around the globe. Wherever you find yourself right now, dear listener, I want you to remember that you have a place to call whole. Now please enjoy this episode. Happy New Year, everyone. This is our New Year edition where we're gonna take a look at what's coming up in 2025. So no matter when you're listening, it could potentially be very interesting. And I'm so glad to have a great astrologer with us today. So welcome, Gray Crawford.
Thank you, Mannah, for being here. There's a lot to talk about with all the big astrological changes coming in the next couple of years.
Yeah, it's always like that with astrology, that it's hard to separate it out because it's in cycles and interwoven. But we're gonna look at pieces of it. I just want to hear, because I'm making a big deal out of being a therapeutic astrologer. So what kind of astrologer are you? You just, well, how would you place yourself?
Yeah, I really just say that I'm an astrologer. I know a lot of times people will say I'm a traditional astrologer or I'm an evolutionary astrologer or I'm a psychological astrologer or something else. I actually have no all three of those are astrological practices that I've done in my life. I've previously studied evolutionary astrology, actually, especially more the Jeff Green kind.
Mm.
I've always been into psychological astrology and had a big influence and inspiration from a lot of those core Carl Jung ideas have always been really important to me. One of my biggest influences is actually Dean Rudyard
Yeah.
with my astrological thought. But for over a decade, it was probably around 2013 or so, especially, um, although it was already starting happening some in 2011 and 2012, I sort of increasingly moved towards learning more traditional forms of astrology and especially got into learning Hellenistic astrology. One of my main teachers with that is Demetra George. I was already really into her work with asteroids and the way she brings in mythology. And actually, Demetra has a big Dane Rudhyar influence on her as well. And then I've spent a lot of time learning a lot of the Hellenistic astrology techniques, but I bring that sort of depth psychological perspective
Mm.
in when I'm using those techniques. I also
Yeah.
do know horary astrology, and with that, I learned more the William Lilly
Yeah.
traditional form of horary. So, yeah, I mean, I really just say I'm an astrologer because I can look at things a lot of different ways. So, yeah.
That's a good skill to have. And so we are united in our Pisces suns.
Yes.
And I guess there's also that square to Gemini coming into it with piecing
Mm,
things together and wanting to navigate the mystery of the Pisces by learning and spreading these ideas. So that's
yeah, I'm definitely have a big Gemini Pisces. I have some Sagittarius too, but the Gemini Pisces is especially strong with me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, well, let's take advantage of that and look at what's coming up. So, I've been talking to a lot of people, I feel, this recent, at least half year about the coming times. Uh,
Mm,
Not really defining when, because usually channels are not so specific. And now we get to be a little bit specific. I mean, we're primarily just looking at 2025. And
mhm.
so we have that Neptune in Aries coming up. Do you want to start there,
Hmm.
or where do you want to go when I talk about big changes? What comes up for you?
That's great. We can talk about Neptune.
Okay.
W- we're both Pisces, so we've been with Neptune for quite some time now, going through our sign.
Yeah, opening us up.
Mm.
So now what's going to happen, Gray, with that?
Yeah. With your experience of Neptune being in Pisces, has that been were you already into astrology before that, or did anything with astrology come in a lot more for you with Neptune and Pisces?
Yeah, it did come in because that
Mm.
was 2010, 2011, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, with Neptune and Pisces. And for
Mm-hmm.
me, that was when that was part of like a major crisis for me, where everything just fell apart. And then that led me to go into yoga, and then that led me to
Mm.
go into astrology, and then therapy, and here we are.
Great.
Yeah. How about
Yeah, I was into astrology already, but what it went for me was more taking it to another level and not just being something I was studying on my own and having a more private experience of. And I was doing some consultations already, but I wasn't really putting myself out there. It was really just people I knew around me and local word of mouth and friends and that kind of thing. And Neptune pretty not it didn't take long for Neptune to be in Pisces for me to actually go to my first ever astrology conference, to actually create a website and a blog and start writing, which once I started writing there, more people started contacting me and I started doing online consultations. And by the end, I mean, at this point, I'm doing astrology full time.
yeah, that's
So it's really gone with a big change. And you mentioned our Pisces suns, my midheaven and Mercury are towards the beginning of Pisces. So that was really like Neptune going over my Mercury, my midheaven, really being okay, you're going out into the world with this astrologer identity and going to start sharing your thoughts and perspective. And by the time Neptune's come to my sun, and also my Jupiter is at the end of Pisces as well. And so this has been going full time and actually getting like a YouTube videos going and being more comfortable sharing myself more visibly. And I think it's sort of dissolved some of my inner issues where at first I was much more comfortable just writing and communicating. And in fact, at the beginning of the transit, when I first created my website and blog, I didn't even have my name on it.
okay.
Wasn't exactly clear who I was. I had my name, but I wasn't really. It was called Esoteric Embers. I think I did have a little avatar saying Gray, but it wasn't like Gray Crawford and talking a lot about myself. A lot of people actually thought I was a woman even when they read my writing because there was no photo of me or like anything. So the Neptune transit for me has really dissolved all of that and it's been my whole real public astrological career in many ways, I would say.
That's
Yeah.
the public function, is what I'm hearing in Pisces, right? It's the public function as well, something that
Hmm.
becomes collectively owned in a way, and it's not just your own, but it's visible for others. And so we have a lot. That's that change we're talking about now. That Neptune is going to move from Pisces into Aries, but then we have the nodal shift. So we're still going to have some Pisces going around because we have the nodal shift from Aries Libra into Virgo Pisces.
Mm. That's
So
also a big deal.
it is, yeah.
Yeah, and so I mean Pisces is such an ultimate placement for a Neptune transit. And your earlier question about my astrological perspective is important here because this is one of the places where, interestingly, even though Neptune is so unitive and can dissolve identities and boundaries, when we talk about Neptune and Pisces, we come to a sharp division in the astrological field. When I was learning astrology, I learned Neptune and Jupiter rules Pisces, and I definitely was using Neptune as a rulership. Although perhaps it's because I have Jupiter in Pisces, I always was like, "But the Jupiter in Pisces makes a lot of sense to me." And the way I use rulership with the different Hellenistic techniques and traditional techniques I use, I don't actually now use Neptune as a ruler of Pisces because that Jupiter rulership's really important for a lot of the techniques that I'm using. But I do understand the perspective of people using Neptune as the ruler.
Mm.
But I would say, even if you're somebody that doesn't think Neptune rules Pisces, Neptune has such an incredible affinity for Pisces. And when we think about that dissolving, unitive, transcendent, the way Dane Rudhyar would talk about these outer planets being these galactic ambassadors, and this huge vision of, really everything outside our limited constraints of perception and reality. Neptune can really open us. While full of illusion, we are also all full of illusion, and so Neptune, of course, can awaken us and take us to this much bigger, deeper perspective of reality. And in Pisces, it's really just the ultimate. I mean, it can take in everything. It's such a deep internal, watery, synthesizing, mixing all of these different influences together. And the astrological field has just been flooded with the transit. It's so dramatically different, astrology before Neptune was in Pisces and since Neptune's been in Pisces. And so that contrast of moving from Pisces, this water sign where Neptune has so much affinity, into Aries is a dramatic difference. And
Mm.
that crossing point of moving from the end of Pisces to the beginning of Aries is so extremely powerful. And that's definitely something we can talk about if you'd like. What's interesting when you brought up the nodes is the nodes, the head of the dragon, the north node, is also swinging through that same area, right? As we're talking, the north node's getting to the very beginning of Aries and will be transitioning across that same point as well. And before we get a little bit more into that specific point, one thing I would say, if somebody listening has, Pisces as being sort of this ultimate spiritual symbol and sign in their head, and thinking, how does Neptune and Aries connect or relate? One thing to keep in mind, if you don't have a more traditional astrological background, and even I would think people studying evolutionary astrology and other perspectives would realize this anyway, but just in case, the fire sign really is considered like the ultimate spiritual element, right? It is that divine inspiration. It's that noetic fire of like nous. And Aries is the exaltation of the sun in addition to being the home of Mars. And so we have a very uplifting, visionary, spiritual quality coming in, but it is so different than Pisces. And it's going to have such a more quickening acceleration and fiery force coming through that's really going to catalyze a lot of change. There's so much changing in this next year, but I really feel that Neptune and Aries piece is really the maybe the most important thing of all, especially with Saturn coming in with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, great. I can't comment on all of that. I'm, I'm seeing things as you speak, but I do feel like saying that there's this question, because you're saying you're having the higher version of this come through, right? But there's this question about war in the world as well.
Mm.
And Aries is the sign of war. So
Mm-hmm.
so what do you I bet people have asked you. What do you
Mm-hmm.
say when people ask you about that? What's going to happen with our conflicts in the world?
Yeah, and that's, I think, the thing that is concerning and scary for a lot of people about the astrology coming in. If I was just looking at this astrology without knowing the increasing global conflict in the world, I wouldn't be as concerned about it.
Hmm.
It's, to me, different than, the astrology of 2020 looked like ahead of time that was going to be really intense. We had Saturn and Pluto coming together on their own south nodes, which was so incredibly powerful, combined with Jupiter getting in there. And then Mars was activating it. And then we end up with this Jupiter Saturn conjunction at the end of the year.
Yeah.
There's a lot more coherence and harmony with some of these aspects. And it's really unprecedented to have them all entering signs, Pluto going in from Capricorn to Aquarius, forming a trine to Uranus going from Taurus to Gemini, and then Saturn, Neptune at 0 Aries, like right in between them, sextiling both. So there's a real wild card element with that, which I think it's hard to know what can take place. But certainly anybody that's studied this astrological history in the United States knows that the United States has a track record for becoming even more involved in wars with the Uranus and Gemini transit. And as you're saying, there are numerous global conflicts just spiraling out of control right now. And that is certainly a fear of something that can happen. And so I think it's definitely good not to just not be aware of that, and bring awareness to the fact that that's certainly something that can be happening. I mean, we're in this time of, I think, that kind of primordial chaos and formlessness. It's very Pisces, Aries cusp of coming to the end of Pisces and out of this dissolution and fluctuation and formlessness, something really emerging. And it could go many different ways. And I think these next 2 years in that way are really critical. Usually when some sort of new order is wanting to emerge, there is incredible disorder. And I mean, that's what's going on. And so I think for me, if people get really fired up about their lives and their purpose and are really engaged with what they want to create and really involved in their community and so forth, I think there is a lot of exciting change that can happen with this. But then, of course, like you're bringing up, there's all these other global power struggles going on and warfare erupting and bombs being dropped and so forth. And so where you are in the mix of that, you're going to be affected in different ways.
Yeah,
And so it's very complicated. Yeah. What are some of your thoughts about that?
I think it's a very good answer, because one thing is the astrology and another thing is remembering our part in it as well. And as
Yeah.
Aries is good for that, our part in it and our self agency. And so that's one way to look at it, that that maybe it has been, a lot of things has been more faded, and now there's some momentum to actually follow more of what you feel you really want to do in this life. But then Neptune, I don't know. I don't know exactly, but Saturn is going to come in there as well. And what we're talking about is really reflected in that Pisces Virgo, where the notes are entering, because it's that how much can I influence, right? And how much is just up to the flow of life? That's really the question.
So are you speaking to sort of the Virgoan needing to surrender to the flow of what's happening with the Pisces? Is that what you mean? Or
because I mean, Pisces is usually this feeling that I can't really do anything about my life, and it just happened this way, and I found myself here. And Virgo has this experience that no, I need to do something about it. I need to change things, and I can, unlock small nuances, and then I can actually change stuff. So it's finding what's appropriate for each moment in that.
Yeah, it's a great point, and it's interesting with this because there is a lot of activation going on around that north node, moving from the end of the beginning of Aries to the ending of Pisces. There's Neptune there, so we're gonna have a Neptune north node time, and Saturn's there, so it's the Saturn Neptune cycle coming to the end in Pisces, which you really cannot get more symbolically balsamic, and this downward dissolution, ending and letting go and something new coming in quality, like a balsamic phase. I think then Saturn Neptune coming to the end in Pisces, and the north node is there. And then Venus is going to station retrograde in March and come across there. And Mercury is going to station retrograde in Aries and come back to Pisces. So we're going to have, Mercury retrograde, Venus retrograde, Neptune, Saturn, all around that north node towards the end of Pisces happening. But at the same time, there's no planet over in Virgo, but we will have this very powerful lunar eclipse in Virgo. And then later in the year, we'll have 2 new moons in Virgo. There'll be a new moon at the beginning of Virgo, and then there will be a solar eclipse at the very end of Virgo. And with Mercury, ruling Virgo, there's also some very powerful Mercury retrograde phases that we'll be going through during the year. So there's just a lot getting concentrated on that north node area, because of the Saturn, Neptune, and everything happening in Pisces. So there is something where we're really being taken into this Pisces inner dissolution. And you're right, sometimes Pisces can have that feeling of surrender too much. So there's a healthy surrendering to the flow, and then there is an unhelpful passivity. And that is something we do not want to do. But it's tricky because we can't be overly grasping for control and clinging to the way things have been. So the Virgo has to get on board with the flowing Pisces stream coming through here. But I guess one way to think about it is Virgo being at the helm of our ship, and Virgo making really good navigational decisions, about how to steer us through. But we need to embrace the change coming through. We can't just stay back and or try to be too over controlling. There's certain things that we're gonna have to just deal with and embrace and accept, even if they're difficult. And Saturn Neptune time periods are so extraordinary. They're so multivalent. They can be so difficult, despairing, disillusioning, but they can also bring an incredible new hope and inspiration, this new sense of reality coming in. And with that shift to Aries, that's one of the other things I think Virgo could be helpful, because we are going to need to sometimes step back and be discriminating, be discerning, and not just get swept up in something. Neptune can sweep us up into something beyond our normal identity. And in Aries, it could be like, wildfires and this, bursting through. And so we'll need to make sure we're being discerning about what we're doing and our choices at the same time.
Yeah, but it's a new chapter for sure, right? We agree on that. It's a new chapter. And you were saying before, the Aries point with the 0 degrees of Aries, maybe because that's going to be targeted this next year. So I want to talk about that. And I also want to remember to ask you about employment. what do you think about that? Because Aries can be the entrepreneur, right? And following your passion. And when we're talking about Pisces Virgo, there can be all sorts of upsets around employment and maybe finding another job, and maybe just issues around what it is you're working with. But how do you see that in context? It's always in context of everything.
Yeah. Are you suggesting that, do you feel this could be, the Aries could be helpful in terms of really striking out on your own in a more self-employment or entrepreneur way?
Well, if I'm bringing on the helpful glasses, if I'm seeing the potential here, then it's also the collective, because it's Neptune, right? So what if there's like some demonstration or something going on in terms of employment for workers, for example? I feel it's really needed that some people in certain social classes are being, heard and paid more and stuff like that. That's kind of just like a hope. So I'm very biased. So I'm curious what you say.
Well, that's one of the big wildcard elements of all of this, because I absolutely agree the astrology coming in could coincide with mass demonstrations, big protests, people really demanding change. It could come about in different ways. And with Neptune involved, Neptune's something that can actually bring people together. I know we talk about things being really divided and polarized. That's certainly the case. And that can also spark conflict between those polarized sides of a conflict. But in the way Neptune can also bring people together, there could be, yeah, I definitely agree. Big events coming in. There's certainly this other sort of Pluto and Aquarius unseen power, behind the scenes going on. And there's all certain types of ways that this could all play out. I do think with the Jupiter Saturn conjunction that happened at the beginning of Aquarius, and now Pluto's in Aquarius, we also have, as we're talking, Mars is retrograde in Leo. But as this year plays out, it'll go back to Cancer, but Mars will come back to Leo, opposing Pluto again later in April. So there's a lot of volatility and things being shaken up in that type of that Leo sign, which is all about the sun, which is great for radiance and authority and sort of centrality of power, but it's being volatilized. And then think about Neptune coming into Aries, which is the exaltation of the sun, and also then bringing in this Neptunian dissolution and flow. And Aquarius is much more decentering and much more about the people and the multiplicity and people that are on the outside even. So I do think this concept of people being more empowered, I do think where you can be an entrepreneur and get more of your own work going, I do think that's going to be really supported for people. I think I don't know enough about all the economic trends, but it would make sense to me that different systemic structures people have relied on for employment in the past will be dramatically changing. If nothing else, just because of all the technology we see changing. But we can also imagine that pretty obviously, I think, with the astrology. And so, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I do think that when you're talking about mass demonstrations and people really protesting for labor and for based upon economic conditions, that's a very consistent thing with Saturn and Neptune when they come together. Not just our sense of collective reality being shifting and changing, but a lot of times actual revolutions and radical movements bursting out of economic inequities and people being on economic hard times, and just all this it driving them to really take at times even forceful action. And of course this is Aries we're talking about, so yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So, but there's something about this Aries point that's special.
Mm,
What
mm,
do you feel about that? So, because Neptune is it March 30 or something? It's gonna go into
yes.
Aries March 30,
Hmm.
and then, but then it's gonna come back out again in November. It's gonna
Yes.
retrograde back into Pisces. So, meaning there must be a few hits to that Aries point, and yeah, as well with the nodes just before they shift signs into Virgo Pisces. I mean, that's because I think you were mentioning that earlier, right? That there's something really even more potent here than just the sign. The 0 degrees is like, this is truly a new chapter.
Yes, I mean, symbolically, if you work with a symbolic astrological system that really puts a lot of focus on that 0 Aries as the beginning of the zodiac, absolutely, we just have some basic symbolism there, like the end and the beginning. But this is really a real legitimate aspect of our astrology, especially those of us that use the tropical zodiac, because the 0 Aries point marks that day of when the sun enters 0 Aries. We have that incredible phenomenon of equal day and light all around the world. In the northern hemisphere, it marks that point of increase. Dane Rudhyar, so much of his wonderful symbolism is based on this, right? The sun moving up, coming across that intersection of the celestial equator and the ecliptic, and then rising in declination towards its greatest height at the summer solstice. Of course, this is reversed in the southern hemisphere, but it's still an equinox point. And so planets that cross that, this Neptune and Saturn are moving from being southern declination to move up across, projecting that celestial equator of the Earth out into space. That they'll hit zero declination more like in 2026, but they'll be getting in the area in 2025, and so this is a point of incredible manifestation, and it has a astrological symbolism that's very similar to the north node of the moon in terms of this hyper point of like increase and like a surge of something coming in. So yeah, absolutely. That's why when Neptune hits that at the end of March, and then Saturn will come in at the end of May. They'll both station in July, really close, to almost like 13 minutes away from each other at the very beginning of Aries. It's right then that Uranus comes into Gemini to really activate something. And then you're right, they end up coming back into Pisces. So it's interesting then about there is this whole like thrust of some kind of new vision and movement. But like you said, they're going to both come back to Pisces. So 2025, I think it's this big stepping stone or link into these even bigger changes coming the next year. So we sort of get this intimation or these vistas of future potential and possibility. And I'm sure we'll be starting to move there. But because they come back to Pisces, we're not totally done with this balsamic ending phase of Saturn and Neptune in Pisces. I think of it very much like almost tending a cauldron, and things are melting and mixing together, but something's brewing in that cauldron and so yeah.
Yeah, and like you were saying before, like you said something about there needs to be chaos before new chapters, and
Absolutely.
that's sometimes difficult to see what is the ending and what is the new chapter beginning, right? It happens simultaneously that something is over and we are coming to the next. So I want to share with you, Gray, that I don't do astrology just like transits wise in English, but I do it in Danish and in my native language sometimes. And the most common comment I get from people when they've seen it is that, oh, that sounded really professional. That's really cool, Mannah. But I didn't understand anything.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, oh no, because if I was professional, I would actually be able to, actually communicate the interpretation. But I get what they're saying when they say that they don't understand it, because it's not actually the words that I'm saying. It's because we don't really know what we're talking about. It's in this abstract field, and we can imagine something, and sometimes things can come up in dreams, and we can think maybe it's related to this. But do you agree with me that it's difficult to actually just pin down this is what is going to happen?
Well, I think that's you're really getting into some crucial questions about astrology, and I actually find a lot of value in a lot of the more traditional techniques that can be helpful with timing and getting a sense of where things are going in somebody's life, especially if they're coming to you with very practical questions they just want to know. But I think sometimes there's a tendency with that to want to grasp for control. And we have to realize there is a mystery of the unknown. And that's a big point that's very important for me. Even though traditional astrology can sound very predetermined, and some astrologers might even veer in that direction a little bit, I'm definitely not somebody that looks at everything being predetermined.
Okay.
And the mystery of what's going on right now is really extraordinary. Without getting into all the astrological rationales of why, just for the people listening, if they don't have that type of, I know, because we can easily get into using square and conjunction and talking about these cycles. And I keep saying balsamic phase, and people may not really get what I even mean by that. So balsamic phase is the end of a cycle. It's things are going are decomposing. It's there's a rot. There's like a fermentation. And in alchemy, that we do think about the Negretto phase, but I think Saturn and Neptune and Pisces is very solutio, like this dissolution. Things are dissolving into this watery solution, which as you tend to that solution, a solution eventually emerges, but we often have to hold that tension and monitor what's going on in our unconscious, like you were saying, paying attention to your dreams and different signs of what's going on. And in later in the year, when Saturn and Neptune come back into Pisces, like in November, they'll both be there for sure. Jupiter will be in Cancer, and they will actually have this water trine going on, like a water triangle, where Jupiter will be in Cancer, Saturn and Neptune will be in Pisces, and Mercury and Mars will be going through Scorpio. And Mercury will actually be going back and forth at the Scorpio point, which creates, for people that don't realize what that is, a very flowing, water element, where I think connecting with this dissolution and this fluidity and formlessness will be really important. But before we get to that, we're going to have this surge of new ideas and new ideals and inspirations coming in. What's important about that particular alchemical phase, though, which goes with what you were just talking about, is that dissolution, it allows things to go back to that sort of prime materia state, which is what allows for the transformation. And so this is a period of time when we look back on it later, we would be guessing, we'll be like, wow, I can't believe how much ultimately changed. But when we're in the middle of the great changes, it can be more confusing and disorienting. So when you're speaking back to that Virgo part, I think that's a really great emphasis you brought up earlier, because I think we will need that Virgo, just like do some grounding and making sure we're keeping it real. Our fantasies and minds can potentially run away from us if we're not too careful in this time period coming up.
Right. Yeah. Also okay. So we have about 10 minutes left.
Okay.
And I have a few things I want to ask you. I got curious about when you were just talking about Mercury there.
Mm.
Do you have a special thing for Mercury and Hermes?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do.
I
Yeah.
think I saw that on your YouTube. You have a webinar on Hermes. So
Yeah, I
what
definitely feel Hermes is very important to me, and Mercury. It's very important just in my chart, and I'm very into the Mercury cycles and astrology, and yes.
So what's going on with Mercury in 2025?
Well, one of the things is this past year, people may have noticed, if you're paying attention, that Mercury was going retrograde in fire signs for the most part. And that will be continuing in 2025, but there'll be a mixture of some of those going from fire back to water, back to fire, which is again interesting because it's very similar to that Pisces, Aries, Pisces borderland of that, these fire water transitions, which are extremely transformational, and they're not an easy, it's maybe the most difficult in some ways, difficult just in type of, it's very dramatic, the difference between water and fire, right? It's just very dramatic difference in those qualities. So that's one thing going on for sure. So Mercury in its cycle will, with the sun, will typically go retrograde 3 times a year. Sometimes it's 4 times a year. And that's when Mercury is closest in between us and the sun. And then Mercury will also have 3 other conjunctions when Mercury's on the other side of the sun from our orbit. That's called the superior conjunction of Mercury. And that's when Mercury's moving really fast and direct and is reborn and reanimated by the sun. Whereas when Mercury's retrograde, it's very intense. It's as close to us as Mercury ever gets. And it's kind of in our face. when it's reborn and regenerated. So there'll be those ones that are going really fast on the other side of the sun from us will be primarily in air signs. At least I know there's one in Aquarius. I believe there's one in Gemini also. But the retrogrades, which are usually what stand out for people the most, because the retrogrades kind of demand our attention, and the Mercury retrograde usually leads us through some sort of deep change. I actually love Mercury retrograde periods, and I think they can be very productive, but it's very much that psychopomp Hermes shepherding us through some sort of underworld process. But if you're somebody that works with, you mentioned like therapeutic astrology, if you're monitoring the unconscious and unconscious processes, they can be so incredibly powerful for creating change and changing patterns, sometimes deeply rooted patterns at times during one of those periods. So they're going to be very powerful this year. There's the one where Mercury goes retrograde in Aries and then comes back to Pisces and then comes forward again. And that's so powerful because Venus will be retrograde also in Aries and Pisces. There'll be eclipses happening. This is the same time period that Neptune is moving into Aries. In fact, as Mercury is retrograde, moving backwards from Aries to Pisces, Neptune is simultaneously moving from Pisces to Aries. And so they basically cross each other. And so Mercury is actually involved in shepherding us through this Neptune transition into Aries. It's really fascinating. And then later in the year, there'll be one in Leo. And then there'll be the third one that begins in Sagittarius and goes back to Scorpio. So if you're listening and you have things in your chart where Aries, Pisces are important, and then Leo, and then Sagittarius and Scorpio, those are going to be the areas that Mercury's doing some deeper work of change in.
Oh, this is cool. And the reason why Mercury is so important is that it's the ruler of the South Node. So
Yes.
this year it's even more important for everyone to look at where that placement is and what it's bringing up from maybe ancient lifetimes, maybe potentially that could be that perspective as well when it's connected to the South Node. Because we know where we have Neptune, right? We know where the ruler of the North Node is, and then looking at Mercury could be interesting.
Yeah, there'll certainly be a lot of technological changes happening as well that goes with Mercury. But I think with what you're bringing up makes me think a lot of the more spiritual, material, conscious, unconscious, bridging quality of Mercury that can bring the unconscious to the conscious and connect the spiritual to the material, finding out the material of the immaterial and the spiritual of the material and back and forth. And
inside an object, like
yes,
what is the soul of this thing?
absolutely. And we're going to need Mercury. We're going to need to deal with the way things are changing. And what's great about Mercury is if we're really working with Mercury, we can realize when things aren't going our way, instead of just trying to grasp for control and get really frustrated, just be curious about, okay, what's going on here? How do I need to change? What's the actual meaning of this? Something is going on here that I can't fully understand, and I need to adjust to this, and I need to embrace this and find the meaning here and adapt and change. And there'll be so much changing that if you have one thing going on where you feel like it's a loss or something's not working out, there very likely could be something else opening up somewhere else that you just need to look around and catch what that is, because so much is going to be changing. It's truly a period of astrology where these next couple years are taking us into this place where, not to get too hyped up about this, but it really is a time where some things could start happening that really go beyond our present conceptions and ability to even imagine what could happen. There is that type of potential is here. And so we definitely need to connect with our deeper soul, as you're mentioning, and our bodies, and that mercurial Virgo connection to the here and now and the present moment, and keep coming back to that to help center and ground us during these changes coming in.
Okay, and I think you're already answering it, but I'm still going to ask my last question.
Okay.
I think a lot of people listening will be asking themselves or wanting to ask you, what is going to happen to me, right? This is, what does this mean for me? So maybe just some more that we can say directly around what, how to be with this, what opportunities could there be? And of course, this is not exhaustive. Like, we don't even have a lot of time in this episode. And we can link people to your blog, and there's consultations, and people can study on their own, all of that. We know that. But just for the sake of this conversation,
Yeah.
you say something about what are the opportunities. I mean, let's say someone was considering changing their job. Is it a good idea, or is that gonna come like this major crisis and you wish you never had changed your job? Something like that.
I mean, that's the crux of it, because a lot of people are holding on to jobs because it's bringing them stability and security, even if they're not happy. And so when people come to me with consults and they're wanting to do something like that, I like to always ask them a lot of questions and make sure they actually have a plan. And so to me, it's going to be good to really, instead of just like leaping into something really dramatic change that you're not really prepared for, you haven't really planned for, I would be just really taking a lot of active steps in that direction. And I would take into account the fact that so much is going to be changing. Even things that you formerly thought were stable and secure may no longer be anyway. And so what is it that you're really passionate about? What really brings you alive and inspires you? You know, where can you really express love and creativity and inspiration in your life, and start taking active steps in that direction with however you can do that. It's going to be extremely important, and the more of us are doing that, the more it's going to be helpful. You know, also perhaps getting out into your community if you can, to get involved with things that's of interest to you. There's certainly lots of stuff online as well, but I think too that real people connecting in real time, in real life, is also going to become more and more important also with the changes coming. But that's the main thing to me. I mean, I don't want to ever tell someone just to like quit their job and jump into something else and they don't really know what they're doing yet. But really take those steps to get that plan going, and push yourself more in that direction than you ever have before, and really embrace the possibility that you can create that direction of change in your life, because what the astrology is supporting is change. Great change, things not staying the same. So you want to embrace that change with what you really want to, you know, what do you want to create with your life, and get excited about that. Even though, like you're saying, there's lots of concerning stuff going on in the world. I'm not saying there's not, but we need to find ways to kind of create that inspiration and joy and creativity in our lives.
Absolutely. Definitely do. Okay, well, that's an encouraging message for sure. Like, go for what it is, a plan for what it is that you really want to, because change is coming. And
that Virgo, you got to get that Virgo plan. That's, I think, I really like that you were bringing up the Virgo, because we need those Virgo plans and details, and making it happen.
Make it happen, and reminding us that we are participating in this. It's not just, okay, we'll sit back and we'll see what happens. I mean, that's how it can feel. And it definitely, for a lot of us, felt like that with the pandemic. Like, it feels like it's just faded and we can't do anything about it. But then looking at it from this perspective, from the Aryan and Virgo as well perspective, there's actually some agency here as well. There's something you can do to influence.
Yeah, this is really different astrology than 2020. I would say both 2020 as well as 2025 and 2026. Those of us who have been into astrology have been knew about these years, 25 years ago, in the early 2000s, certainly. And I think older astrologers than me were even probably thinking about them earlier than that. I mean, there is a period of time that really stands out, but this time period that we're coming in now is not the same as the astrology of 2020. And so the way things broke down so much and it changed, and this quality is this quickening of change and what's emerging out of that 2020 period, right? And so I wouldn't expect the same types of things to be happening at all. It's going to be very different, also very dramatic, and it will at times be things that are like, this is just erupting around me, and I didn't intend for this to happen, but we're going to have to work with whatever that is. That makes sense.
Good to know. Really good to know that it's different like that. It looks more hopeful.
Yeah.
Way it can be used in a different way.
Yeah, there's more potential hope and inspiration with it, and but that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. And like you're saying, given the state of the world, there's all sorts of really concerning things that could be erupting. So it's one of those times where we're here for a reason, and that's again why coming back to why are you here?
Yes.
And what do you want to do with your life? And go for it.
Yeah, leaning into that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Gray Crawford.
Yeah. Thank you, Mannah.
Doing this New Year episode with me, and Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you. Thank you for having me on your podcast. I've really enjoyed speaking with you.